Well, hello. Well, hello. Well, hello, Mike Manley.
Hello, Jamar Nicholas.
Kirby, hands up. Oh, that really caught on. What's going on? Hello, eternity forever. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, all and sundry, back to my barking dog and pencil to pencil, your favorite pandemic.
He's letting all the other dogs in the neighborhood know.
He's telling all other dogs, "Yo, we're podcasting. You need to
Oh, we're
listen."
live. We're live.
We're live, cousin.
Spread the word.
Welcome back. It's our Saturday shift here at Pencil to Pencil.
Our shift.
Yeah, we just punched in, and Mike is writing the menus down for late dinner. Mike, real quick, what's the latest that you'll eat dinner when you're staying up all night? Like, do you get hungry at 4 a.m? Because I know you do a lot of all-nighters.
Yeah, I haven't done an all-nighter in maybe a month.
Mm-hmm.
It depends. You know, if I ate today about 4, that was my first meal about 4, and then so after this I'll probably eat again. And if I stayed up really late, like 4 or 5, I might have like a bowl of cereal or something.
Mm-hmm. You don't get the itis after eating that cereal. Your eyes get real heavy.
No, well, I mean, I would probably eat the cereal, and then again, it depends on am I pulling an all-nighter and getting like a half hour of sleep and then
Right.
get up and work, or but yeah, I can eat. I've eaten late, It's like usually what would happen during a deadline is the beginning of the deadline, you go into bed early or normal, which for me is probably 1, 2.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of the deadline, that gets pushed to like 4 or 5 in the morning, So I'm not, I don't always eat breakfast. Mimi likes to eat breakfast. I don't always like to eat breakfast. I like to eat a good lunch.
Does breakfast I don't know, does breakfast kind of tell your body it's time to get up when you try to go to sleep, right? Breakfast is like the wake up meal, right?
I think I'm just so used to getting up, and then I like to have, like when I was going to school, I would get up and I would eat because I'd have to go, and you'd want to eat something because you're not going to eat until lunch, and that might not be until like 11:30, 12.
Right.
Or if you're teaching, you need to have a little energy. But now I'm on my new workout routine. So what I try to do is get up and exercise first to burn stored lard, and then I'll eat afterwards. So I actually got up. I rode the bike for a while today. Then I did a bunch of house chores. And then I actually went for a walk. And when I came back from the walk, I ate about 4. So I went like, half the day without eating anything, which I can, if I have a couple cups of coffee, I can actually go all day without eating.
Wow. Sometimes I feel like I'm eating because I'm bored. You know what I mean? Like if I'm up real late, I'm not,
just eating like bags of chips or something.
Yeah, but we could talk all about cartoonist eating habits.
We should have that. That should be a pencil to pencil. We'll share like recipes and gym routines.
I like that. Yeah, I think we might get a lot of people who would be interested in something like that. So let's do our intros so we can get our guest out of the green room before he eats all the Chex Mix. Welcome everybody to Pencil. I am Jamar Nicholas. I just got a new nickname the other night, like the Black Dusty Roads. The Black Dick Cavett, Kevin Bacon of comic books, and your internet best friend.
Bacon of comics.
Black Bacon. And I am joined, as usual, by the hip, by my best bud and modern master of comic books, Mike Manley. Say hi, Mike. Well, hello.
Hello.
Pencil to Pencil is brought to you by the good folks at Graphicsly who make, look up here at the John, Clip Studio Paint. And also our best bud, John Morrow, who is the publisher at Two Morrows Publishing, your one-stop shop for enjoying the history of comics. It's so rich.
Yeah, and I think John is actually having a sale. He usually always has some kind of sale, but I think he had a sort of a Halloween-related sale.
Ooh,
books on, I think he did like the Warren Companion and things like that.
So. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, so go to tomorrows.com and spend some money. So let's get our guest in here. Mike, our guest tonight is acclaimed story artist and animation director, and also part of our crew. We have a crew. We don't talk about crews, but we have a crew.
We might have to murder people. It's like Fight Club. You don't talk about Fight Club.
But yeah, it's funny. And we'll probably talk a little bit about this later. Is that when I was in college at UArts, I had secretly, well, not much of a secret. I secretly wish I went to SVA. But I stayed here in Philly and
had SVA envy.
Yeah, I had a little SVA envy. And then come 15, 20 years down the road, almost 3/4 of my cartoonist circle are SVA guys. So it's kind of kismet, right? So I probably even would have been in class with these people, but here we are anyway. So all roads lead to glory, if you think about it in that way.
Yes, prefect.
That's right. So let's bring our good buddy PHIL ALLORA in. Phil is going to get us caught up in what he's doing. We'll get his secret origin story, and we're just going to talk shop. If this is your first time watching Pencil to Pencil, hello. If you're watching live on YouTube, I hope you hang around, subscribe, and smash that alert bell. If you're watching on Facebook, please like and follow.
Smash your computer if you're watching.
Then they can't watch. We have very exciting episodes every week, so be a part of the army. So let's bring Phil on in. Woo! What's up?
What's up?
What up? What up?
What's up?
Yeah, I like those Tony Starks you got on. Those are nice.
Thank you. These are my blue light reducing
clip-ons.
Yeah, they're made by Duco.
Oh wow! Look at those.
Do you find does that affect your vision if you're wearing them all day? Do you notice a difference?
I do. Yeah, actually, when I wear them for the majority of my work day, and then I'll if I take breaks and I'll flip them up because they do flip up like that. I'll notice that everything suddenly pops, all the colors that were taken that were prevented, from me seeing those. It'll just, all the blues and everything will just be boom, 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 and it just pops back in, which is fantastic. So it's a great little trick you can play on your eyes, but it does soften the glare and the blue light that's hitting you all day long now that we're working on Cintiqs, which is pretty much our daily grind, So I got them a little while ago when we switched over to using Cintiqs, and it's been great ever since. I find it enjoyable. So
yeah. I have most of my glasses because I'm like a glasses fashion dude. I got to match my glasses with my outfit. Very Philadelphia. A lot of them have that blue, what do you call the lens blocker, the glare thing.
Right.
For digital.
Anti-glare, anti-blue light.
Yeah, the anti-blue light thing, yeah. So,
these are made specifically to cut down on the blue light because as we stare into these computer monitors, they're just blasting our eyes with blue light. And that's, studies have shown that the amount of blue light you absorb throughout the day influences your sleep. And if you're working into the night, especially if you're doing freelance, not that I'm doing a ton of that, but if you're doing that into the night, that could affect your sleep. And then, to be fresh the next day, you just want to make sure that you minimize the amount of sensitivity and stimulation that your brain gets during the night. So
it's one thing that we don't talk about a lot or enough of is taking care of your eyes, right? Which is kind of taking care of your health, but taking care of your eyes and taking care of your hands. So I don't know. How does that work in your household, Phil? Are you like, I'm not hammering anything with the nail. This is the money right here.
Well, contact sports are definitely not high on my list of things that I do in the my off time when I'm not at the Cintiq. So like boxing and martial arts are definitely not like things I engage in, because that's like definitely going to engage the hand. Yeah. But when it comes to like house repairs or like doing things that need to get done, I'm all for it. Physical labor, that's fine. So that's not off the list. So
just no mixed martial art.
You're not being Tony Hawk on the weekends and smashing your body up.
Yeah, as much as I used to do that when I was at SVA, because my friends and we used to skate like through the city. As much as I used to do that, like that kind of like, as I got more and more into animation, I was like, I think I'm gonna like avoid sports that might compact my wrist, because I've seen like some friends who've just done like various things and mess up their wrists and their hands, and it's just like, yeah, that'll put them out of commission for a while, and that really hampers their ability to keep going. Make a progress. So,
well, especially when you're young and in college, and you'll go move somebody's couch for beer,
right.
Things like that. And I just always think in the back of my head, it's like, what if you're the cartoonist in the group who's like, yeah, guys, I kind of don't want to do that. You're gonna have to punk out on a lot of things because you don't want to mess your hands up.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, but I still like, it's still good to like go out and be physically active, get the exercise that you need. I mean, it's great to hear that Mike is engaging in this fasted exercise program, which is exciting, and just being physically active. Since we live a different life, being the creative field, that is so important, for artists in general to stay physically active, because having read so much about how that influences your overall emotional well-being as you sit down to create, like it goes hand in hand. Like the better you are off physically, then the better you are off creatively. So it all works together. I know if I miss a day, let's say I don't exercise, like I'll notice like the big difference creatively.
Yeah. I wonder if now, because we just talked with Kat Hudson the other day, we've talked to a lot of people. Everybody in animation is working at home. So you're working just like the average cartoonist. Everybody's working at home. Yep. So was there at the studios, do they talk about that? Do they talk about things like, things to do for your health, for your back, for your posture, for your eyes, things like that?
Like let's stretch out those metacarpals and those tunnels.
Because I know a lot of young people that are already having, in their 20s, they already got carpal tunnel problems.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also folks that I know who work in animation that I've asked, like, so what do you do when you're not drawing? They're like, well, I don't draw. Like, and I'm like, well, why not? And they're like, because I don't want to like put the extra strain on my wrist, during the, off hours. And I'm like, okay, I can understand that. But at the same time, there's things that artists can do to maintain their health of their physical body while they're working. Studios themselves, like they have wellness programs that, again, some studios are more proactive about this than others. When I had started in the business at Disney, at Feature, they had ergonomic specialists that you could consult, and, you could have them come to your desk. They could observe you, how you worked, what your posture was, and they would give you pointers of like what would be the best way for you to get through your workday with the correct posture and working, suggestions on your posture to minimize the amount of strain you put on your back or on your wrist or on your shoulder, arm, whatnot, and to reduce the possibility of injuring your wrist, especially your drawing hand. Since we were working on paper, so we had both arms active. So I was drawing with my right, flipping with my left, which was great. So you still had a lot of activity. Now that we're working on Cintiq, you've got one hand that's drawing, my right hand, and then you've got the other hand in like the death claw position on your keyboard, hitting all the hotkeys. Or if you've mapped those hotkeys to your Cintiq, you're pressing buttons with your thumbs, but you still kind of like got your hand like this the whole day.
Oh yeah, I've caught myself doing that death grip on the
Yeah.
side of the Cintiq. Yeah.
So it's good. Like there's no like one size fits all right now for the studios. It's kind of like it's on each artist's prerogative to engage in behaviors that would help them in the long term. So like whether it's taking complete rest and not doing anything, or just whatever it is they feel is the best protocol for their health and longevity.
Right. So why don't you reel us back through time and give us your origin story. You've moved through the business pretty good. I mean, especially since I've known you. So
right. Well, let's see, how far back do we want to go?
Well, you went to SVA with
yes.
with our mutual friend Scott.
Yes.
Scott
yes.
Cohn.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Scott and I we met in Klaus Jansen's sequential art class, which was graphic novel class, which was by far, if Klaus is still teaching that class, shout out to Klaus Jansen.
Yeah, he is.
Probably,
I think.
Absolutely the best teacher that I had for sequential art. I mean, no knock on Carmine Infantino or Joe Orlando. They were both top-notch, top-tier talents, but I soaked up so much great tutelage, learning from Klaus. He is just not only a great guy, a fantastic artist in his own right and storyteller, but he's also a great teacher. So I took his class in junior year, and my senior year, I foregoed a portfolio class to study with him as an independent study for half a year. And then the other half a year I spent drawing, because the first year I spent with him, we were working on storytelling and sequential art. And I was really focused on going into the field of sequential art, becoming an illustrator for one of the big titles. My target was Vertigo, because I was enamored with everything they were putting out. That was kind of like in my wheelhouse. And after doing 6 months with him, he recommended, focusing on drawing to get me to where I wanted to go. And that was great advice. So I spent the next 6 months of my semester, or my term at my last year, focusing on not only storytelling, sequential art, but also just getting better at drawing. And
so how'd you do that? Were there like, what was your regimen to do that?
Okay, well, I had signed up for an independent study, again, foregoing my portfolio class, to study with John Ruggieri, who was a drawing teacher, a student of Jack Potter, famous classic illustrator from the 50s. And I met with John, and I would just go out and draw like every day. So I was trying a lot of different things. So like in the summer prior, I spent the entire summer just going out on location and drawing with my left hand. I'm a right-handed artist, but I was forcing myself to draw with my left hand for a summer, basically to say like, what's lacking here? What do you need to do? I started asking myself questions like, what do you need to do to get better at what you're drawing? And I said, well, you need to observe. You need to observe more. And I'm like, well, because you get into a habit, when you're drawing with your usual methods of your, what you're comfortable with, you get into this habit of like, I know what to do. I know, you look at the model, you look at the object, you're like, you start drawing what you think you know instead of what you actually see. Right. So then by switching over to my left hand for like an entire summer, it was like, oh, I gotta look at that, because I can't control my hand. I can only control what I'm looking at. And it was a real test to do it.
I bet. Was it frustrating in the beginning?
Hell yeah. Yeah, it was super frustrating. But the challenge to me was that, you have an opportunity to really grow from it by forcing yourself to like stick through it and really soak in what you're drawing. The other thing I would also do is I'd spend time waking up every morning before going to class, or this is something that I did for 4 years when I was going to SVA, because I was commuting from where I lived in New Jersey to Manhattan, New York City. I'd have about an hour and a half to ride on the train from where I live to Manhattan. So on the first leg of the trip, which was like about an hour, I'd spend that hour drawing people around me in the train in my sketchbook. And then when I got to Hoboken, which is where the train depot was, I'd get into the PATH train, which is the PATH. It's basically the subway that runs from Hoboken to Manhattan. And I'd ride that for about like 15, 30 minutes, depending on how many stops and how long it took. And I would have a little sketchbook. So I'd have like a big size, like 9x12 sketchbook for the big train. And then I have a little like 3x5 sketchbook that I could take out of my jacket or my pocket. And then I'd be sketching people's hands. And I was just like constantly training, because having, you know, looked at so many of the art heroes that I grew up with, reading their comics, I just was I would always marvel at the way that they would draw hands, the way that they would draw figures, the faces. They just had this enormous range by which they were depicting characters in these fantastical situations. And I was like, how do I do that? It's like, I don't know how to do that. And so I would just try to train myself, like, to first copy, and then later on in my career, after like getting into animation, it switched from copying to sort of breaking it down and trying to understand what I was drawing to make it sense.
Phil, when you were back on the train in the subway, like the PATH and the commuter rail, did you ever get caught? Like, you ever get confronted?
Yes. Yeah.
Those are always interesting stories. Do you have any interesting ones from somebody going, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" or "Stop drawing me," or anything? Like that?
Yeah. I was on location in Ruggieri's class. We were down at the South Street Seaport. It was at the ferry terminal. I think it was what's the ferry that's down there? If you can remind me, it's the if you guys remember, it's the ferry that goes to Staten Island.
Staten Island Ferry.
Yeah, there you go. I was at the Staten Island Ferry terminal in Manhattan, and I'm drawing like all these different people, and I'm drawing this crowd, and this one woman caught me, and she walked up to me with her hot cup of coffee, and she said she saw me, she wasn't sure what I was doing, and then I just kept drawing, and then she walked up to me and she took the lid off her coffee, and she just said, "If you don't stop drawing me, I'm going to pour this all over you in your drawing." And I was like, okay. She's like, "You better erase that right now. Erase that right now." I'm like, okay. And I turned it around and I said, "See?" And she's like, "Okay." You know, and then she walked away. And I was like, all right, cool. Great. All right. So I had this nice big smeary drawing, and I was like, let me think, what did she look like again? Okay, she's gone now. All right, let's go back to drawing what this lady looked like. Okay, she had like beanie cap, long hair, long jacket, and it's So to me, it's like I got used to that. I think that that other time we were down in South Street Seaport, there was a crowd of 5th graders that were on field trip, and they crowded around me, and it was really interesting to see like what their response was to me drawing this boat that was there on the pier. And they would crowd around, and they were getting too close, and they were crowding in, and there was like one guy who was behind them trying to be like the ushers, like, "Stop pushing, he's drawing, stop, quiet, he's focusing," you know, and they're like shoving each other as they're trying to get a peek as to what I'm drawing. And those kind of interactions were a lot of fun, because like they would ask me questions, and I would just talk to them while I was drawing. They'd ask questions like, "Why are you drawing?" or like, "What are you drawing?" and you know, "What brings you here?" And that was a great opportunity to interact with basically a live audience when you're doing something that's creative, and just be able to showcase like, "Hey kids, like you can be here in all of this crazy New York and still do something really fun and creative by drawing something that's, you know, people take for granted." In that case, it was a tugboat, or being in the crowds at Grand Central Station was also like another fun experience, like drawing like people walking by, and you know, just trying to capture like what's the essence of that environment.
You get like 2 or 3 seconds sometimes to see somebody, like, you know, I would take the kids from UArts out, and we would do the same thing. We'd go over to Rittenhouse or whatever, and you see somebody really interesting, but that's about all you would get. You would get like, like that.
Yeah. And it wasn't until like it was such a hard thing for me to do. I would just end up with like really incomplete, awful sketches. And what I didn't find out until I got to Disney feature that I met an animator in one of the drawing classes. We're in a drawing session, and to this day I remember our conversation. And his name was Elliot Bohr, really talented animator. Now he's kind of like high up in the chain on Disney Creative. So he and I were talking about drawing, and I said, like, how do you draw like these models as they're like, taking these really quick poses? Because I was still in this kind of phase of like, just I have to have what I need to draw like right there in front of me in order to be able to get it down on the paper. Mm-hmm. And he was saying, like, you just take a snapshot. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, just use your mental camera and just go like snapshot and then just get it down. And I was like, okay, like I never heard that before. Like I never, like in all the years that I was at SVA, it's like we were always drawing the model or what was in front of us, or using reference from a morgue, that AKA like reference, scraps from magazines.
Right. Yeah, not a real morgue.
Right, not a real morgue. We weren't going to the New York City morgue to draw from people.
or the New Jersey morgue for a really long time.
Yeah. And that guy, like, I had to pose him. He stayed there forever. It was great. But anyway, so we were talking, and he's like, take the snapshot. And I was like, I didn't get it. And he's like, just go out and just try it. So I went for like that year, like every day, like on my lunch break, I would take my 9x12 sketchbooks and I would go out to the park and I would just try to do that. And I remember the first sketchbook, it was just full of really awful sketches, like just stick scratches, and it just took a long time to start to see a progression. And then once I had finished that sketchbook, I was like, oh, look, there's some faces. Wow.
You found something in there. Right?
There's like, oh, look, it looks kind of like a person now, And then I started the next sketchbook. And then as I just kept doing it, like the more I was able to train my memory to take that snapshot and then put it down on paper. And like, if I needed to remember, like, what did that guy's hand look like? Or what did that tank top or the shoes look like? Like, let me go back and look at that mental reference. And then it was like, then it became like a context of how can I make this thing, this visual memory in my head, how can I construct it on a piece of paper so that it's there and it's accurate to what I saw? And I'm not filling in the blanks with my imagination. It's like, no, he didn't have laces that went like this. I think the laces were like that. And then you're like double checking it. And another good friend of mine that I met at Disney as well, like he told me that was like his secret for drawing from life from animals, because it's kind of the same idea. Yeah. Like he would go to the zoo, this famous cartoonist named Eddie Pittman, you may know. He told me, like, I would go to the zoo, he would draw like the animals, get down these rough sketches, and then he would go home and he'd have reference from tigers and various animals that he might have been drawing. And then he'd like use his memory and the reference to finish the sketch. And he created these beautiful pieces. Cause I look at him and I'd be like, holy crap, like, how did you capture this tiger in mid leap? And it looks so, like fully fleshed out, rendered, constructed, and just totally solid. And I was like, I don't know how you're doing this. And I'm giving away his secrets, but he was kind enough to share it with me.
Well, the idea of, or the technique of taking a mental snapshot of something it sounds like almost like a memory trick, kind of like I'm likening it to speed reading, right?
Yeah.
Where you're going through something and you're kind of quickly picking out key elements of something. Like when somebody walks by you and you're making a mental snapshot, you're remembering probably kind of like a shape, a size, maybe a feature on their face that's pronounced, all of these things that you can do at a split second's notice, which is I think it's a learned skill.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like capturing your essence.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about drawing comics, and especially is you're drawing from stored information, and once you train your brain becomes more acute to picking out what you personally find interesting in a pose. Because at first, it's like the whole world's yelling at you, and you're going like, how do I get the whole world down on the sheet of paper? It's the same way when I first went out landscape painting. It's like everything in nature is going, paint me, right? Well, you can't paint every leaf, so it really is like training. And I think with animation especially, you're trying to always get the essence, that gesture. And that's what I learned was from talking to a few animating people like Chris Bailey and whatever, is you would like draw the gesture, and then like your friend go back later and put the meat on it.
Yeah.
You get the energy, and if you got the energy, you can always go back and make the finger nice. You can always go back and put those little things on it. But if you don't get that energy in the beginning, you cannot push that back into the drawing afterwards.
No. I mean, that's one of the great things I learned from Chris Bailey, who I had a chance to work with when I came out here to California. Great guy. Loved working with Chris. He's just got so much to share, and approaches each of his projects and the team the way he brings the team members together in such a unique way that it was a great opportunity to kind of soak in as much as I could while I was there. And he would do that too. Like he would sit down and be like, oh, try something like this. And he would like just hit the essence of the pose. And I'd be like, whoa, like cool. Like that's so amazing. And then he'd start to build the figure out on top of it. And then that information I've passed along to board artists that I work with now, who are up and coming, where, there's a lot of tendency in like television animation. There's a lot of emphasis on like, you have to draw to conform to whatever the model might be, the essence of the show. Artists are requested to try and get as close as they can. So the overseas studios can then extrapolate that information and make it closer to the model. And I always suggest to the artist, like, start with the basic first, like give me a really strong pose first, and then you start to build on top of that. And that way you've got your really solid foundation and you build out from it. Because you're right. You're absolutely right. Like if you have a kind of a weaker expression or a weaker pose, you can't really build out on that. You can't force the parts on, it's like you have to start really, really super simple and go out.
Yeah, I learned. I think I learned a lot about. It made me better from doing storyboards, because one of the things about doing a board, because you're matching somebody else's style, which is sort of like the second part. Is the first part is all the gesture and the storytelling and all the most important stuff, and then some guys I worked with were not guys who put things exactly on model, but it worked so well that, like, I remember when I worked on Kim Possible, Dave Bullock did a board, which was awesome, but he was not a guy you would say was like on model, but everything was so good, they would rather have him do that than put it exactly on model like a layout, and then it would be stiff.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Jamar.
Well, I was gonna try to bring Phil back to the origin story, because we took him off the track. So okay, so you're an SVA, and I had an SVA question, so we wrap that up, and then we go into the next phase.
Okay.
For a lot of people who may be wondering about art school, because we all talk about art school with very kind of like high regard, but also there's some mystery there. How did you get graded in a class like sequential storytelling or graphic novels? Because it's like one would think, if all of you guys are really amazing comic book students, shouldn't everybody get A's in class? Like, how do you get a bad grade in in Klaus's
I
class.
can't read this. This is crap.
Right? I would always want to know the answer to that. Like, what's a bad grade, or how do you get bad grades?
I'm not exactly sure how by what criteria Klaus judged the class, and I'm sure Joe Orlando and Infantino had different criteria by which they graded the students. What I can say, based on the feedback, because we would have to put our artwork up on the walls, and then they would walk through the artwork and kind of critique it as we turn the work in. And they would point out, like, these panels, like, if your panels, you need to tell the story clearly. So if your clarity is missing from your storytelling, and you're spending too many panels on unnecessary bits of information, your economy. So you have to focus on your economy, your clarity, and how much excitement you pack into the page. So, like, those were things that, like, out of the three, like, those were all encompassing. It's like that had to factor into each one of the panels. So each person was shooting for that. So if you were perceptive in the class and you were hearing the feedback that was coming from the other students' work that may not have been as successful in their attempt in that particular assignment, you'd be like, oh, okay. Like, this is my thought process. Everyone has their own. My thought process was, I was picking up on, like, what were the things that were coming up consistently on the other artwork that was not successful. Okay. Clarity. That's one. Okay. How much information are they getting across? How are they presenting or staging that information so it's clear to the viewer? How much excitement or entertainment are they packing into that page? What's their layout like? How are they designing the page? How are they leading the audience through the page to make sure that the eye flows from, like, the way that we read comics from the left side all the way down to the right panel? How does that lead to the next page? Like, all of those factors need to be juggled, in your sequential art as you present it on the page, because you can make like I had another class. I'm not going to mention what class it was, but the emphasis of the class was more about, like, how well can you render your art, your sequential art. And what was lacking for me when I was in that class, the difference that I could tell from having sat in on Walt Simons' class, who's a phenomenal comic book artist, huge fan I'm a huge fan of his.
Well, he may be watching. He likes to lurk in the chat room.
Seriously, like, I still have my Walt Simonson Star Wars comics issues that I had a subscription when I was a kid to Star Wars because I was a huge Star Wars fan. So this is when Marvel was mailing comics to people in the mail. They came in brown wrappers. I had a subscription to Star Wars and Amazing Spider-Man and Spectacular and Web of Spider-Man. I mean, okay, 3 Spider-Man titles, not enough, right? But anyway. So I had a subscription to Star Wars, and when Simonson's issues were hitting the stands, basically hitting my hands, I would look through his pages and I'd be like, holy crap, he is telling the story like I've never seen it done quite like this before. And his style was so dynamic and different that it stood out for his covers. And then I think, was it Tom Palmer, who was finishing his pencils? And I just fell in love with what they were doing. So when I would go to these other classes and they would talk about sequential art and it was all about the finish and not about the fundamentals, to me, I could kind of tell the difference. And I was like, no, this is not what it's about. It's not about the finish. It's not about the gloss. It's not about the flash. It's like, how well are you conveying the story? How well are you entertaining the audience? Like, how can you bring the information to the audience in an exciting and engaging way that's going to make your pages stand out? And that's something that has to be practiced. It's not something that you can learn from a class. Like, yeah, you can get the pointers. You can get your pointers and critiques from these amazing teachers. And that's the thing. I have to tell you, like, I was in Klaus's class and I sat in on Simonson's class, but I needed a lot of practice to just get to the point where I could tell the story in a way that they were firing on at their level. Like, I was, when I got out of SVA, like, I really wanted to do comics, but I wasn't at a point yet where it's like I can put a page together and make it sing the way that I saw Chris Bacallo put a page together for Shade the Changing Man. And when I would look at his pages, I'd be like, that's what I want to do. I just want to be able to like hit that mark. I wasn't even shooting for like Walt Simonson level of storytelling yet. I was just like, I just want to be able to get to, I'm not to say that Chris McCullough is like, I mean, I still revere his work, but I'm just saying like his aesthetic that he was applying for Shade was where I was trying to shoot for. Like if I could just get to that point and tell the story that way, I could probably, you know, I'd be like, okay, I kind of got there. But it took me quite a while to just soak in all the information that I was getting, all the feedback that I was getting from the instructors, and be able to, you know, kind of work that through my system and then make something happen on the page that would be fairly decent. And that means, like, again, just like drawing, they say like you need, what is it, like 100,000 or 1,000 or
what's it,
10,000 hours, 10,000 hours?
Not 10,000 hours. Like I was told
1,000 bad pages.
100,000 crappy drawings before you start to get to the real good ones. So it's the same with comics. Like your first couple, you know, 100 pages of comics that you do are just going to be like, ugh, you know, but then you just keep going to try and practice that muscle, practice that storytelling, practice until you finally get to the point where it's like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So like, you were asking me a question about SVA. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked.
Oh, well, no, you answered it. It was just kind of like the academics of going to such a specific program in New York with a bunch of legendary cartoonists as your professors. I think from the outside, and I always take the layman's stance, that, you know, your family is like, okay, so you go to art school, so I'm assuming you're getting straight A's, right? Because that's how it's supposed to work. But I think
that's the other thing about art school, though, is that everybody gets A's or B's, and only like 2 or 3 people out of every class end up going on and doing stuff. So all the other people that got A's like you don't, or B's, they don't. So in a way, where the false thing about grades is grades don't actually equal your capacity to perform as an artist, right? It's a way of moving everybody through the system. You attended every class. You're a nice person. You turned in every assignment.
You don't
every
complain.
assignment, right. But the reality is, for especially now that schools are all so expensive. I mean, it's probably twice as expensive as when you went to SVA now, you know? I mean, So, but I mean, and I know that from having just gone through school myself within the last 10 years and also teaching, you know, everybody wants that A and they go, I got the A. But really what you want is the skill, because once you leave school, nobody gives a shit about whether you got an A or a B or a C.
Exactly.
You know, they're looking at your work.
That matters. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The only thing that matters to editors, like if you were trying to break into comics, the only thing that matters to editors is what you put in your portfolio. If you have something in your portfolio that says this guy or gal can do the work that I'm publishing, that's all that matters. You know what I'm saying? Like you could be, like for example, fantastic artist that I got a chance to know a little bit in some of the classes I had, Jean-Paul Leon. Like he's just phenomenal as a head. He went in his own direction, you know, taking what he learned from the classes that I was in with him. He was in Jack Potter's class and Ruggieri's class, and he and his brother, super talented guys. But I mean, he was in his, I think it was sophomore, junior year when he started doing work for Milestone on Static Shock or Static. And after that, man, it was like he hit the ground running. I mean, Rich Faber, same thing. It was like he had a portfolio of, you know, beautifully inked work. He was picking up pencil work from, I think, Chris Batista, who he was inking on him over some issues of Steel. And then it was like, boom, he was just off and gone. And that's what mattered to the editors. Can you do the work on a professional level and it's regardless of like what you get in your class, like as high marks as you can get for turning in all your assignments and having perfect attendance. What matters to in any business is like, how are your customer service skills? How well do you work with others? Can you deliver the goods on time? Can you deliver the goods at the level that we're looking to publish? You know, those are important factors, especially for those kids going to school. You know, when they think about going to art school, you know, there's like a little bit of a mindset shift of like, when I go to school, I'm not going to school to become an artist. I'm going to school that I'm going to become a sole proprietorship. You know, like I look at the two of you guys, like you guys have set up your own shop. You've set up your own business. You have assistants. You have a business that you're bringing in clients. You're doing client work. You're putting your names out there. You've got a lot of things going on, and that's the business side of things. You know, the glamour is like the art side of things, where it's like, I got my name in this book. You know, I've been on, you know, this comic strip or this, you know, newspaper or this like self-publishing or whatever it might be. But the business side of things, which I really wish if I could go back and tell my younger self when I was at SVA, is like, get into the business side of things, because that's really what you have to start thinking about yourself doing when you graduate, because you're not just doing this to do this, like you're doing this to be, you're setting up your own company, and that's you. So you as your own company, you know, whether you work for a comic book publisher, online publisher of comic strips, or internet animation or studio animation, you're still running your own company. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you're the kind of like the CEO of, you know, whatever company that, you know, your namesake is going to be on, and that's how you have to look at all these engagements and relationships that you partake in, whether it be at school or once you get out of school. That's kind of the thing that I started to see when I got out of school, that it didn't really matter what my grades were. It just mattered how can I cater my portfolio of sequential art to match the Vertigo style. Like they are looking for something specific. They're looking for established artists who can deliver either a unique look, but they could also deliver sequential art, you know. And so that's where I was shooting for, and like thinking about, you know, how could I trade in my day job for this other business that I was trying to hustle on the side, which was to get into comics.
So how did you go from SVA to animation? Were you thinking about animation too, or did you? Because that's sort of like, I mean, that's how I was. I was thinking comics and animation, and I actually had tried, as I talked before, but I couldn't get to LA, and I was sort of discouraged. So I ended up years later doing it. But you were thinking comics, but then you end up working at Disney.
Yeah, funny how that happened. I was dead set, man. I was like hardcore. Like I got out of school and I was like, I don't want to do anything but comics. I was working a day job, like graveyard shift early in the morning from like 5 a.m. till like 1 in the afternoon. And I would go home every day and I was like, okay, I'm just going to knuckle down. I'm going to work on my pages from 2 o'clock after lunch until 9 o'clock at night. And that's all I did, is like for the first 2 years out of school, all I did was work on like trying to get better at sequential art. And I remember my friends would call me up and they'd be like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm working, man. I'm working. I'm just trying it. I'm just trying it. Because I really wanted, like, I was going after like all these small publishers to try and get some work. And I think right before I got into animation, a couple things happened that kind of sparked my interest, because I was like tunnel vision. And so I think it was, I forget exactly what happened. I went with some friends and my sister. We went to go see Aladdin when it came out in the theater. And this was kind of like the time when Disney was starting to have a huge ramp up in their 2D animation. There was kind of like a renaissance right after Little Mermaid came out. Aladdin hit the theaters. I went to go see it, and previously, I had always watched animation, And I'd always loved watching, the feature films and anime and various productions all across the spectrum. And I went to go see Aladdin, and I was just like, boom, like it just hit me. Like they told a story that was so engaging and so different compared to everything I had seen prior to that. Because you had people of color singing, falling in love, telling a story that was engaging, and 3D graphic integration. So they were telling a really epic tale. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize they could do that, and it just kind of knocked me back, because I think Little Mermaid was kind of contained. It was more along the lines of like traditional Disney films that I'd seen.
Right.
And then they started introducing more CG, especially with the Cave of Wonders, where they were flying Aladdin on the magic carpet through the environment. It just kind of opened the doors and like, whoa, they could do some really great stuff in 2D. The characters felt really alive. And I was informed that, because Disney at that time, there was DreamWorks was starting up. I think Warner Brothers was starting up, and Turner were also starting up. They were all starting up their own divisions for feature animation, and going around to different art schools around the country to recruit talent, raw talent from illustration programs. And I was informed about that through one of the SVA newsletters, and they asked, like, okay, you need to put a portfolio together if you're interested. And I was like, sure. I was pushed into it actually by my own as I didn't want to do it. I was like, no, I'm gonna do comics, And I had gotten a job. I think I'd been like peppering all these different independent comic book companies, because there was like Caliber and Slave Labor, and I was hitting companies up. And Slave Labor got back to me, and they're like, hey, would you be interested in working on one of our lines? I was like, sure. So I jumped at it. It was like, again, it was a pittance, but I started working on that. And at the same time, I was working on this portfolio. So I wake up every day, again, early in the morning, and I get my friends to volunteer to pose for me. And I'd be drawing from life to create a portfolio that kind of matched the portfolio that was in the Disney packet that they had given to SVA's.
Okay. So you knew what you needed to put in your portfolio.
Yeah. So they kind of said, like, this is your target, right? And then I was like, okay, I guess I should do that. So I got to include like animals. It's quick sketches from animals, quick sketches of people, and like more refined sketches. So I started culling together a lot of the materials that I had done while at SVA, like extended study poses of the figure, quick sketches that I had done of animals and such. I started putting it all together, and to this day, like I put it all together. I submitted it. They went through a review process. I think they had like 2 rounds of interviews. And I remember like sitting outside the Dean of Illustration's office while the Disney recruiters were going over portfolios and interviewing candidates, and I was nervous. And I was like, because I loved what they had done, and I was excited about it, but I was like, how do I get through the nerves of just sitting outside of this office before I hyperventilate and go into this meeting with this recruiter? So
they're like, you're next. Come on, bring your portfolio in.
Right. So I just did what I had always been doing. It's like I cracked open my 9x12 and I just sat there and I just started sketching like people in the room and sketching from my head to just like kind of zone out and block everything out. And there's people talking to me and they're asking me questions and I don't remember what they were saying. But
you had to go to your safe space.
Yeah, basically, it's like I just went to the safe space in the sketchbook and like zoned out and like chilled in the sketches and like kind of got the nervous energy out that way. And then when I went into the interview, it was a cool interview. We went over the portfolio and talked about stuff, and then I think about a month or so, maybe a month and a half later, like they had to send all the portfolios to. Like I made that round of interviews, and then they sent all the portfolios to be reviewed by the artistic staff at the actual feature animation studio. it was reviewed there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got a call right around, I think it was probably like 4 months later, I had started on the comic. So I was penciling and inking for Slave Labor. Dan Votto, if you're listening, thanks for the shot there. It was great. It was like the first issue. I was like, all right, I'm drawing the Griffin. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm drawing away and telling the story. And then I got a call from a Disney artistic rep, and they're saying like, hey, would you like to come down to Disney to work on this production? And it was funny because I had switched to that mindset of like, I'm kind of like in a business mode. So I started asking them all these important questions like, okay, so like, tell me about this. And like trying to like, Gary Schumer, who was the rep who was talking to me later, he told me later, he was like, you were the only guy who grilled me with so many questions compared to everyone else who just flipped out when they got the call that they would like to get called down, and it was just like, this is like business,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right. Yeah.
we were talking like, what's the rate? What's the deal? What's the project? That kind of a thing.
Rather than just saying, yes.
It's like, yes, I'm in. It's like, it was like,
Right.
yeah, so tell me more about the project. So what's this? What's the thing?
Mm-hmm.
So it's
What's the cool part that I get to do?
Yeah. So it was fun, to talk to him. And then afterwards, I mean, we got to know each other, and we would be in drawing class together. And, it was just fun joking around, but at the time, growing up in New York or I should say New Jersey, New York, tri-state area, you just kind of, you get used to that. You're conducting yourself in a professional manner. You want to make sure you know all the information before you go in. And, do your due diligence before you jump on board.
So how long was it from there to? I guess you you relocated to Florida?
That's correct. Yeah, that was in 90. I'm going to date myself here. I think I moved. I moved down to Florida, packed up everything I had, into a car that I had, and moved down to an apartment in Orlando, Florida, and started working on Mulan, which was directed by Tony Bancroft and Barry Cook, who Tony you had on the show, which was awesome to hear.
Did they help you like find a place to live and?
At that time, studios were relocating artists. They were assisting with relocation by helping to coordinate the move, like, hiring a moving company or coordinating, your information with the moving company, and then offsetting the cost through your salary and stuff like that.
Because I mean, that's also another thing that I think a lot of people don't really. It's one thing if somebody goes, I want to hire you. You're living in Vermont and you're getting hired in Southern California. Be here Monday. You got your job.
Right.
What? How do I? Where do I? What? That's
right.
usually the thing that nobody talks about.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really revealed as part of the. But that's a big part of the process. Is whether how do you do it? Do they help you? Is it do you have to absorb all that yourself? Because when I was working for Warner Brothers, I was looking to relocate to LA, and it was friggin' expensive. It would have actually been cheaper for me to leave everything in my house, leave everything, and buy everything new in LA than to actually move it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's something that I talked to Gary about when he first called me, and I was asking questions like that. So, do I relocate? Like, do you guys pick up the expense? Like, do you hire the moving company or coordinate? How is this going to work? And those are all details that I did again with another company when I moved out here to LA. That was back in 2005. So, like, again, when I moved, it was the same deal, but again, it was a different company, different pace. And every company is going to operate a little differently, especially depending on the economic situation in the U.S. at the time. So at that time, when Mulan was ramping up, there was a real rush to hire as many fresh artists as they could to get these movies up and off the ground, because Little Mermaid had come out, it did well. Aladdin came out, did really well. Beauty and the Beast came out, did exceptionally well. And I think I may have gotten an order mixed up here. But then before I joined Disney, like Pocahontas came out, or Hunchback came out, which it did okay. And then Pocahontas came out after that. Didn't do as well but again, like what was cool that we were seeing on the Disney rise to, I missed one big one, which was Lion King. Lion King came out.
Oh yeah.
I think it was like right after Aladdin, because that was the ramp up to it. How can I miss that one? So it's like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and it was like boom, like the doors open, 300 million domestic, and people were just like, oh man, there's like so much money to be made in animation. So there was a huge grab for artists to get projects like in the pipeline, and Mulan was one of those projects which I was fortunate enough to jump in on, because when Disney recruiters had come to SVA, they had shown like some promotional art of all of the projects that they had going when they made their initial sales pitch to the artists or prospective students to recruit. And when they showed images in Mulan, I was like, yep, I want to be on that. It was like no question, because it was like the first time that they had created a story that was crafted towards a specific demo and showcased a story that highlighted and really put the spotlight on a female Asian protagonist. And
Right.
I was like, oh wow, that is so different. That's going to be a unique project. I would love to be a part of that.
So what did you do on Mulan?
I went through the training program. We had a 3-month training program. So once I moved down to Florida in 2005, living in sunny Lake Buena Vista, Florida. I still remember the place that I lived. There was me and a group of 11 other individuals in my training pod. We had 3 months of training to learn the basics of animation. I learned a lot of fundamentals of like how the in-between works, how animation worked. We were kind of like put through the paces and taught by or given lectures by some really top-notch animators like, Aaron Blaze, Alex Cooper-Schmidt, and had some really great mentors like in the training program. I'm probably missing a few folks, but we had that like short training program, and then we were thrown right onto production. It was like go. So I was assigned to, at that time on Mulan, I was assigned to the Fa Zhu and Fa Li, which are Mulan's parents. That was that unit headed up by Monica Murdoch. So we basically were in charge of like making their characters consistent through the film. And when I wasn't doing work on those two characters, I would head over to the Mulan team and I'd ask them like, hey, do you have any extra work? So I was kind of like freelancing, like
inside the system, right? Inside
the system. So it's like if I didn't have work during my regular work hours, like I'd go over to the other teams, like the Mushu team or Mulan team or Shan Yu team, or the Gang of Three team, and I would try and pick up some extra work to really experiment with like, what is it like drawing these characters? What is it like drawing Shan Yu and the ancestors? That was a challenge. And when I first got started, man, like it was tough, going from an illustration sequential art background to suddenly diving into animation. It really put a challenge before me to change my mind from thinking about like lines on a page to creating 3-dimensional objects on a page. Like, so you had to switch from like, oh, I'm not just drawing an arm, I'm like sculpting an arm, or I got to turn this arm in space. How does that thing move from, like, if you got your Kirby hands coming at camera, like how do you take that Kirby hand and like go from here to here and then like there and like, arc it, so you're picking up all these different things and you got to move this object through space as it comes at, and then twist and turn away from camera. And like, how do you time that? So shout out to Joe Hadar, who showed me a lot. When I was in the internship, he was the first animator who was on loan from the California studio, who was visiting Florida, who had sat down with me to go over like the basics of animation. Cause I was doing bouncing ball and jump tests on my own, and we were putting in a lot of hours over that 3 months, like working a lot of extra OT to like get up to speed. Some of the artists that were coming in to that internship program had already gone to, say, like a 4-year college where they were focused on animation already. So they, like, if they came from Cal Arts or was it CCAD, which is Columbus College of Art and Design, they may have already gone through an animation program. So when they came to sit down and do their animation tests for our training, they were just like, all right, knocking it out. Like, no big deal. Yeah. You know, I remember like the internship that was behind ours, like there was students that were coming in from Sheridan and like they would do like crazy, like it was like a walk cycle, but I remember there's one test, really great animator Jason Booz, I think he did this phenomenal test of like a guy walking carrying 2 buckets with water sloshing.
No.
And you know, and I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, I'm just trying to get this cat to walk so it doesn't look retarded or mechanical. So, but again, it's just like going back to what we talked about before. It's like the amount of mileage and practice that you put into it, like the better you're going to get at it. You know, I remember it's like application, practice, application. So,
Phil, I have a question about that. So, you coming into Disney as a sequential artist, basically, did you run into people in your pod or your incoming class who studied animation? Did they have a different leg up than guys like you?
Yeah.
Or were they treated differently because they kind of know how to do walk cycles and squat and stretch? Or did everybody get trained in the same boot camp?
Everyone went through the same training program. So we all had the same assignments. We all had different mentors that we were assigned. The application by which that they approached or that they could apply to of their knowledge to their animation tests, like, was just already there. Like, so if someone had gone to Cal Arts and had spent 4 years doing animation tests, when they come in and they have to do a bouncing ball, like they're going to come in and they're going to bounce the ball. They're going to add another layer of creativity on top of it. Whereas like some folks like myself and a few others were just coming in green completely and had never done animation at all. So having to grasp the foundations of timing and volume and flipping, you know, which took a couple weeks to get right. You know, flipping paper, flapping, you know, as you're flapping the animation paper, you know, towards your face, flipping it, and you're trying to like train your eyes and your mind to see not just lines on paper, but you're training your eyes to see the volume of what's the object that is that you drew. When I was drawing comics, as you guys know, it's like you gauge the volume of what you're drawing of the characters in each panel, and you're like, okay, if it's close to the volume that you drew your character, like from panel 1 to panel 5, you're like, okay, it's pretty close, but I don't have to be 100% like accurate. I mean, you try and be as close as you possibly can so that the reader doesn't tell that it's like, oh, this is way off. But in animation, because you're drawing, because we're working 24 frames a second, and if you have your drawings like the 5th in a row of like 20 drawings, if your one drawing is off between those, say, 10 drawings around it, everything else gets affected. So if your drawing is slightly off, then the next one's going to be off, and the next one's going to be off, and then everything like ripples out from that. So you have to make sure as you're breaking your scene down that your first key and your last key, like they're good, and your breakdown in between is solid, so that every drawing in between is going to hold up. So when you watch animation from studios that may not have had such hardcore quality control, and you watch the scenes frame by frame, you might see like characters like kind of jitter and wobble as they go from keyframe to keyframe.
Like those old Terry tunes where people would kind of warble, or like Johnny Quest when Race Bannon would turn his head and be like, really good key drawing. In between, he had a horrible car accident.
You know, sometimes you look at it and be like, okay, so what happened? But you know, Florida as a studio, I mean, the transplant of all the artists that came to Florida, like they really prided themselves on the quality of the work that they were producing. They really wanted to prove that they could produce high quality animation, even though they weren't in California. And I think Mulan is a testament to that, because when I watch Mulan, even now, the production value from the start to the end was so high as their first, their virgin project that they put out of the studio. It's just like they set the bar. It's like, boom, we're going to like put our heart and soul, and every bit of that was on screen, so that they made sure, like, yeah, you can't say like Florida is not competing on the same wavelength as like the California studios. I mean, not to say that there was like an intense rivalry between like Florida and California or Paris, but Florida as a group of artists, like we all like were collectively on our first film, we're really putting our hearts into making that film super successful, and all of that showed on screen. So it was quite a special project to be part of, and especially creating a film that no one had ever seen before. Like up until that point, like no one had ever seen a film that was led by a female protagonist who is of Asian descent. Like you have a Chinese story, for mass market, which is so different and unique. So it was great to see that film come out. And afterwards, we kind of had a little bit of a lull as we were waiting for the next project to ramp up. I started, I was working on projects with some great people on some smaller assistant work for Tarzan that was in production after while we were working on Mulan. So I worked on Tantor, the Tantor team that was in Florida, for a great team of animation folks in Florida. Sherry Sinclair and Dave Nethery were my leads on that. It was awesome. Roger Rabbit short, which was a test for like a possible Roger Rabbit production. Tom Bancroft animated a lot of that, and I worked with Sherry on that to help get that up and running, which was a super fun project. Like it was, because it was like I had seen Roger Rabbit come out and I watched it, and it was like super classic fun animation, and then to be able to work on something like that, which was so different from Mulan and Tarzan, it was like, wow, this is like classic Disney fun stuff. So it's a great variety. And then from there, worked on another project for the Disney theme parks where we were updating some Robin Williams, rest his soul, he voiced a character that was part of a Back to Neverland project where he becomes an animated character in a Disney exhibit or a Disney like ride. So Walter Cronkite, the great Walter Cronkite, narrated that, and Robin Williams is there as the super fan and becomes an animated character, and had a chance to work on that for a little bit, which was fantastic. Learned a lot from my lead at the time, Sam Ewing, who was an animation veteran, super great guy. Loved working with him. Learned a ton.
So how long were you in Florida before you transitioned away?
I was there long enough to work on Lilo and Stitch and Brother Bear. Brother Bear was the last film that we worked on. I was there for about, close to 7 years.
Wow. So you did a lot in 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we worked on a lot of stuff. Highlight, of course, was working for Sam on Stitch for Lilo and Stitch. That was like, again, it was like one of those things when they came down to pitch the project, I was like, I want to work on Stitch. And it just kind of happened to work out. I was lucky in that way. And that was a blast, because that was a real great opportunity to learn team dynamics, like not only working on an incredibly difficult character to draw, but also working as an intermediary assistant animator, so that I was like overseeing people and also reporting to superiors. Mm-hmm. And that was really interesting. That was a great learning experience.
So why don't you explain to the listeners how that works? Because you get the storyboard, and then they hand out, everybody gets scenes handed out, right? They cast sort of like actors, like certain animators are really good at animals or girls or it's lava or whatever.
Yeah.
So how would that work? Would you go into a meeting and people would fight over which scenes that they would want? Like, no, that's my scene.
You know, but it all depends. Like I was at that time, like you have everything is broken down in workbook stage. So like they go from the storyboard to workbook. They break out like how the character is going to move through the scene and layout. They coordinate with layout team to make the background that's going to work for that particular scene, adjust for any camera pans or camera moves that have to get worked out. That information gets passed to the animation team. The animation team then, you know, the animation lead will then just, you know, divvy up the scenes based on, you know, workload, who's doing what, hand out scene assignments. Animators will then animate. Once the scene is approved through animation from the directors in Sweatbox, then it goes from there to the cleanup animation department where at that time I was working on Stitch and cleanup animation for Sam and our team. And then he would like break down the sequences, or break down the scenes, doing his key drawings, get those approved with Alex, who is the lead animator on Stitch, Alex Cooper-Schmidt, also an SVA graduate. And then from there, like he would hand off the sequences or scenes to each of the leads, the key leads, and then they would then break that down to assistants, and then the assistants would break that down to like the breakdown artist, and then the in-betweeners, and we would kind of like pass the work down and then they pass.
How many people is that? So how many people is that? That's like 5 people?
No. Stitch crew was we had our supervising lead, we had our 2 key leads, we had 3 assistants, 2 breakdown artists, I think, or 3 breakdown artists, I think it was 2, and 3 in-betweeners. So I run out of fingers to count, but it's quite a bit. I think we have 4 in-betweeners or 3 in-betweeners. So we had quite a crew, which was good. It was a tight-knit crew, and we had, as I said, like the work would get passed down from the lead all the way down to the bottom, and then it would get passed back up again. You know, as there would be checks and balances as the work would be coming back. You know, the breakdown artists would pass their work up to the assistants. The assistants would check the work, make sure that it was where it needed to be, and then pass it up to the keys. And the keys.
So what did the breakdown person do?
Okay, so like in the animation process, like you have your leads who will hit like the maybe the essential storytelling poses that would be in a sequence. So like if you had a scene of Stitch, okay, I'm just trying to think of like, all right, there's like one scene where Stitch comes out on the road for the first time. He's in his full flight suit. He's got, he comes out into the road, a water drop falls from the sky, pulls out his blasters, he shoots it, and then fires into the sky afterwards, and then of course draws his weapons on a frog that's nearby. So that scene, the key storytelling poses are drawn by the lead, and then they pass the scene off to the keys, who then hit the remaining like major key poses to define them, refine them, draw them on model. Then that gets passed down to like there's keys in between the keys that are given to the assistants, and then there's breakdowns in between those keys that the breakdown artists would then hit and draw that are like they kind of fit in between the in-betweens. So the in-betweens are kind of like the ones and the zeros that make everything flow together, and there's a lot of activity that happens in the in-between. Like a lot of people, when I first got into animation, it was like, oh, it's in-between. It's like you can do a lot in in-betweens, like rough in-betweens, and in-betweens can make or break a sequence, or they can make or break a scene. So we would do the keys in between the keys. We'd have like big chunks of like multiple keys in a scene, and we would hit those keys, make sure that they were like volumetrically solid, they were on model, they were where they needed to be. All the details were accounted for. All the motion, the anticipation, the overlap, the squash, and the stretch, all of those things were accounted for in each of those drawings. And then we would pass off the breakdowns to the breakdown artists, hit in between those keys. Mm-hmm. They would do their pass it back up to us. We would take a look through it, review it, make sure it was, where it needed to be. And then we would pass that on to like have it be then in between that.
See, I don't think a lot of people really understand, because how many extra people are, because usually you always think there's a lead and then an in-betweener.
Well, Walt Disney just draws it all.
Oh yeah. A computer you just push a button on the computer and
you press the art button. Yeah,
right. You just press the done button and everything just bam, it happens.
Yeah, because I mean, and like with Warner Brothers and a lot of the other studios, they didn't have that depth of a bench. You know what I mean? Like Jones would do the keys, and then they would give it to the animator. And then, maybe they'd have an in-betweener, or maybe not, depending upon your budget. Maybe you don't have. I mean, like what you're working on now, it's overseas, so who knows, right? You don't know how many in-betweeners they have, right?
Right, and most of the stuff that's worked on right now is like I've been working on both traditional and 3D productions right now. I'm just to flash forward to 2020. Since that time, I've been directing storyboards and working as a story artist, doing storyboards since I jumped into that genre of the animation business. And the work that we do is either animated traditionally in a digital program like Harmony or Flash, sometimes on paper, depending on the production budget, and also in 3D. So when you have a 3D team that's working on a 3D show, oftentimes they'll assign scenes to an animator and there won't be an assistant to follow up. Like the days of Disney, like if you had a lead animator working on a character and they broke down their scene, they might take that scene and hand it off to an animation assistant who then adds in the important keys, which then they hand that off to a rough in-betweener who then adds in the rough in-between, who has to know animation as well as the lead animator, because there's going to be a lot of detail that they need to put into those in-betweens to carry the squash and stretch, the anticipation, the follow-through. Like, let's say a character like Shang on Mulan. Shang had, he was the captain of the guard, so he had a long flowing cape, right? And that had to be accounted for in every single scene. So when I was drawing Shang, or all the artists were drawing Shang, not just me. I mean, there was a huge team that was on the Shang team, both on rough animation and also cleanup animation. Knowing how to animate something, it allows the artists, whether they're working on either side, to be able to understand, like, how does that cape move through space? So when Shang is moving and he's turning, like, how is that cape going to react? How is it going to drag behind him? What's the anticipation? Like when he moves to the right, how is the cape going to move to the left or the right?
And how heavy it is and all that stuff. Yeah.
All that stuff has to be taken into account so that, the character feels alive and there's weight to the performance, and it doesn't, it's cartooned, but it's caricatured reality, but it's not slaving to reality. So it kind of feels right. It feels like you're capturing the essence of the character's life without having to be like, oh, we gotta make it 100% accurate.
Hey, Phil, I want to get to some viewer questions, and then let's look through your slideshow.
Sure.
All right, so this will be a little lightning round of questions.
Sorry, we've been chatting and we've only scratched the surface.
No, that's what Pencil to Pencil's about. We're just chopping it up. The patron saint of our podcast, Mama Carla, asks, Phil, would you rather animate things or people?
When you say things, could you clarify?
I'll like a toaster.
People. People, if it's an anthropomorphic toaster, like the Brave Little Toaster, then I could say yes. If it's just like this thing, no. This is my little award that I got from working on Turbo. Lost Staff. That was another great fun project. So we people and characters, they have, not to say that inanimate objects don't have this, because I did animate a broom when I was learning Maya. You have an opportunity, whether you're working with a cat, a person, a dog, a whale, a broom, any object, if you have an idea of the personality that that character has and what performance you want to bring to the table, you could bring anything to life. The idea is to bring the essence of the character to the screen. Personally, what I get excited about when it comes to drawing is like, if I could draw a person's performance or a character's performance, whether it be any kind of character, that's what gets me more excited. Like, as much as I love watching mecha anime, the idea of animating like an invid, you know, would probably be not as exciting if I can't make that invid emote. Because, you know, I grew up watching Robotech, and I loved it.
I was about to say a little Robotech.
I loved it. I mean, I would stop whatever I was doing any day of the week. It would be like 3 o'clock. What time is it? Well, time to go watch Robotech. Like, I don't care if we're playing, we're in the middle of a game. I'd be like, I'm out. I'm going to watch Robotech. Sorry, gotta go. And I'd be home watching that.
Carla expounds on her question. It says, like, cars moving, not dancing toasters. So
okay.
like animating, you know, objects.
Anything that I could get personality into, yeah, I'm all for it. I've done like boards where I've drawn inanimate objects moving, and it's a challenge in itself. It becomes more of a technical challenge. Like, how do I create a believable performance in this particular object to make it feel real to the viewer? But when you have an opportunity to inject personality into it, then it takes it to another level, because then you can start to apply what you feel and your own sensibilities into that and bring something new to the screen.
Very cool. All right, next question. Our good buddy Eternity Forever asked, going back to your Disney days when you were still kind of learning your way around, did they still sweatbox your scenes? And how harsh were the others on your work? Did it help you improve? And maybe you can explain what sweatboxing means.
Okay. All right. So there was a couple of reviews that we had. Directors would do sweatbox with the animation team. That was for animation approvals. So whenever they would have specific approvals, they would gather the animators together and they would review the work. They would shoot it. Like, at that time, we weren't using Leica reels. Like, you know, back in the day, they would gather into a small room and they'd all cram in and watch these like reels of footage of like the animation tests. At that time, we had cameras that were mounted on an arm, so we call them the down shooter, and we were using a proprietary software on these older Macs where we would take snapshots of each individual drawing. We would lay the drawing down and snap it, you know, take a snap, move to the next drawing. We'd go through. I mean, that was part of fond memories I had working on Stitch. We'd sit and like, we'd shoot scenes and then we'd play it back, and then we'd get together and we'd play the quick times of those scenes and review it, and we'd watch it over and over. We'd slow it down, and we'd like look at the drawings for qualities that would stand out, that would make or break the scene, things that need to get adjusted, if there was volumes popping, and you trained your eye to become attuned to seeing things move very quickly at 24 frames a second. Be like, oh, I saw a pop, let's go back. We go back, we like scrub through and like, okay, drawing 50, like, let's make an adjustment on that to, you know, maybe make that motion for the antenna a little bit more fluid, because right now it's kind of like, it's jittery. Right. It doesn't feel as right. So we would go back, make those notes and make the adjustments, and then reshoot it and send it through again. And I have to tell you, from my experience working at Disney and other studios, 10 out of 10 times, like, everyone was very, very professional and very kind. You know, there was no, you know, especially in Florida, there was not a lot of ego involved in the review process. Like, it wasn't a matter of, again, like I said, everyone in Florida was striving at Feature Animation Florida. We were striving to make the best movie possible. So egos aside, it was like how can we make Mulan like the best film we've put out? And then when it came time for Stitch or Tarzan or Brother Bear, it was more like what can we do in each of these scenes to make the best product? And
so it was like a team effort, and everybody's pulling for the team.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the beautiful things I learned from Sam is that, like, you know, he was great in bringing the team together and just kind of like really introducing this idea that it's not illustration. He would always say, it's not illustration, it's animation, you know? So it's not about the individual illustrator. Like, as an illustrator, you're like, oh, I'm working on this good thing, whatever the project might be, to like put my name out there and to make the best product so that like eventually people know you like for that thing. But in animation, as a team, you're striving to make the best performance consistent across every scene, so that when people watch this, 20 years from now, like, because I mean, we made Mulan when it first came out. It was like 98 when it came out, and I'll still watch it today and be like, holy crap, like this movie, like, it holds up. It doesn't make me cringe in any of the spots. I mean, I know everyone has a different impression, but when our goal was like, make a film that stands a testament to the love and effort that the team brought to the project. And with that kind of enthusiasm and thrust, like, there was no room for, like, at that time, I mean, maybe not, to like harshly criticize someone when they put their work up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, moving right along, because we got a line here, which is great because there's a lot of interest. And it's funny that we talk to so many people from so many different lanes in creative. We still find something new to talk about. Like we just had Kat on our last episode. We did some deep diving into animation. We didn't cover any of this. You know what I mean? Okay. There's always a different way to turn the dice.
It's funny. Like, I was listening to Kat's interview. It was great to hear her talk. She's great. And by the way, I met her when I was working on DC Superhero Girls at Warner, and it was fun because like I would just walk into the design room and meet her and Izzy and the other designers, and I love talking to them about art and stuff, and seeing that Kat had, I mean, what caught my eye was like Kat had this amazing Ben Caldwell print on her wall, and I was like, is that a Ben Caldwell? She's like, yeah. And we started talking about Ben Caldwell and her experience meeting Ben Caldwell, and I was like, oh my God, you met Ben Caldwell? Oh my God, like, this is a guy from New York, like, holy crap.
While you guys are sitting in the middle of Warner Brothers, that's so funny.
Yeah, well, exactly. But it's fun to be a fan of like these amazing artists that are around. So Kat's great. So
yeah. Our good buddy Kenny Wong, aka Stunt Ken, says, Phil, do you see any differences in Japanese and American animation? Little animation details that the Japanese apply that American animation doesn't do, that makes you wonder, how did they do that? Speaking on Robotech, right?
All the time. Oh my God. Like, I am like, can I just say, like, I am like such a fan of like the work that's come out of Japan. Like from the time that I was young, again, dating myself, I grew up watching Battle of the Planets, aka G-Force, aka Gatchaman. And Star Blazers, aka Space Battleship Yamato. And I was like blown away by like what they were doing on screen. And that to me always piqued my curiosity. Is like, wow, they're telling stories in space. It's a drama. There's like spaceships, there's combat, there's interpersonal relationship conflict. And it was always so different than when I would watch this standard American diet of cartoons, where it was like Flintstones, Jetsons,
Turbo Teen, come on,
Turbo Teen, the Hanna-Barbera lineup, Tom and Jerry, and Warner Brothers, like classic cartoons. And trust me, I love it all. So I don't have a distinction. And even though I had worked at Disney Feature, I still loved watching anime. And there's things that each style of art brings to the table differently. Like the Japanese have a different sensibility when it comes to storytelling, and really diving into like how they tell the story is just so unique to see what is their approach. Like American animation, like they tend to approach story in a way where you really lead the audience through and kind of like give them the important bits of information from the get-go. It's like, we're going to start off in the classic movie format. We're going to have a big spike. We're going to tell you who the characters are, what they want, why they want it, and what the conflict is within the first 5 minutes. And it's like, boom, you're like into the story. And then there's like a dip, and you kind of like learn more about the characters, and you kind of build to a rise. And then you get to the climax, and then everything kind of resolves itself, and the storylines, the B plots all wrap up. When I was watching Japanese anime, especially when I was going to SVA, I'd watch things like Vampire Hunter D and Demon City, and man, a friend of mine in high school, like this has really got me like into, like I didn't realize how much I was into animation at the time, but a friend of mine named Kang, he was in my art class. He was from Korea, and he lent me a copy of Castle of Cagliostro in Japanese. Like there was no dub. It was just a VHS copy of Castle of Cagliostro, and I would watch it like over and over and over, and I was just fascinated by it, and I was just trying to figure out like, what is this story? And I try and like, I was making up the story in my head as I was watching it, and just looking at what Miyazaki and his team had pulled off, which I didn't find out till much later. They pulled off that movie in 6 months. Something like that. It was an incredibly short amount of time on a TV budget, and it still to this day fascinates me as such a rich story that has exciting moments, daring do, endearing characters, and a heart that I hadn't seen in other films. Like when I watched Demon City, it was like totally different type of story, and it has totally different sensibilities, like how they lay the story out, and they give the audience a challenge. They give them a challenge to let them figure it out. Like, what do you think of this? Like, who do you think the protagonist is? Like, do you like these characters? It doesn't matter if you like them or not. They don't have to be likable. This is the tale we're telling you. Like Vampire Hunter D left me questioning, like, wait, who is the good guy? Like, is Vampire Hunter D the good guy? I guess so, because he beat Dracula, but is he that good or is he that bad? It's kind of like ambiguous. And the more I got into watching anime, it just kind of opened up the doors to like, there's a whole lot of storytelling out there that you can do with the medium that isn't germane to just, the princess movie or the prince movie that has become so inherent to Western animation, where they kind of have to tell the same formula of the story. It's a character who's on a quest,
or they feel they do. I mean, that's the other thing, because I think that when I was working on the Warner Brothers cartoons, they would have the stuff that we did here and boarded here, and then they had the stuff that was boarded and animated by TMS.
Yeah.
And their sense of movement was also very different than the movement that we would board and then would be animated in. Like they have this little stutter step things and people would run. Their sense of movement and their sense of poetry is different than the regular meat and potato stuff that we did here. Even on a series where you have, it's all Batman or it's all Superman, there was a different sense of poetry. I that's why I always sort of looked at it.
Yeah, it's beautiful to take those in and kind of like think about those sensibilities, and then see how can you apply that to your own storytelling. Like if you could take a breath in a sequence that you're working on, if it's a board for a series, and like, is there a moment where you can be a little bit more artistic? There was a movie that I was watching when I was at Disney that I fell in love with, which is not by any means an uplifting movie, but I fell in love with the storytelling of it. There was a movie that was done. He was a director. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Contemporary of Kurosawa, who created a film called Sword of Doom. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
It's kind of an obscure Japanese samurai film, and I watched it and I was just like, wow, this is a really interesting take on the samurai genre, because they presented a story that was kind of like a dark hero. It was the dark hero's tale. And when I say hero, I don't mean he is a redeeming, likable character. He's actually the protagonist of the film, and he's completely unlikable. And you just see this guy, this samurai, he's the best. He's absolutely the best, but he's also the worst. And so you kind of watch this film, and you see how his actions ripple out from, like, where he starts at the beginning of the film, and how that takes him down this path that you don't expect to see. And you get to the end of the film and you're like, wait, what did I just watch? But at the same time, I have to ask myself as a viewer, it's like, what are my sensibilities when I come to the film? I've been so indoctrinated into the Western storytelling aesthetic that, you have to have that happy ending. You have to have all the storylines wrap up. And this story just basically threw it all out. Said, like, we're not doing that. We're going to do what we think is best for this particular character's story. And I was like, oh, this is a really fascinating approach. So, being open to, the little differences between Japanese animation, Korean animation, animation from Europe and America, it's like allowing yourself to look beyond the categories or the classes, or even a ranking system of like what's best or what's not best, or I don't care. It's like what matters is like how well and efficiently and effectively are they telling you a story, and what do you take from that?
Phil,
Yeah,
I have a lateral question, and
Okay.
our good buddy Chris Bailey has checked in. Chris Bailey says, "Hey, I missed you guys. Been busy wrapping Scooby." Chris asks along that line, do you think the American audiences find our kind of storytelling to be slow?
Probably, yeah. Like back in the day, when I was going to SVA, I watched a film at the. Hey, Chris, by the way, thanks. Thanks for checking in. Sorry. Thanks for the question. I went to the Angelica Theater in, what is it? On Houston Street. I forget what part of Manhattan that is. Is that the?
It's in the Village, right?
In the Village, yeah. And I saw this film called The Wooden Man's Bride. Right? I don't know. Again, another obscure film you probably never heard of. Great movie, worth checking out. But it's a slower paced film. It's a slower paced film. It doesn't have all the fireworks that, like, again, it's old. But if you watch a lot of like cinema from Asia, and I've spent a lot of time traveling like to Singapore and Malaysia and back, and on those flights, I'll take, it'll take like 12 to 18 hours. I'll watch as much Asian cinema as I can get, like that I can absorb. And it's a totally different sensibility than what American audiences are used to. They're used to currently, based on what they take in. It's like bam, 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 bam. It's like you got to have that action like right off the bat, or they're turning the channel.
Well, it's funny because I think this ties into Glitch Text. I was watching some of that. That show is like super hyper. It's so fast. It really is. I mean, even compared to other stuff that's on Netflix, I was just really impressed by how there's very little downtime. You know what I mean? It's very super fast.
Yeah, like I remember when MTV was being blamed for the ADD generation, where it's like they just had to have like cuts, and that translated into American filmmaking, and how like American filmmaking started to adopt that like fast pace, where it's like you got to be constantly cutting in order to keep the audience engaged. And with Glitch Text, we were influenced by a lot of the artists that I work with, an incredible team, led by Eric Robles, who's the creator of the show, Dan Milano, who's head writer, Ian Graham, who's supervising producer, and I had a wonderful storyboard team that I worked with. I'm going to give them a shout out if you don't mind. We got Ben Choi, Alex, Chu. So, now I'm stumbling at Michael Fong and Sheldon Vella were on my team at various stages throughout the production, and Ben and Alex and Sheldon, they all did an incredible job keeping pace up with like the influence of anime in the show. We were trying to fuse. And Etienne Guignard, who also was joining me on season 2. We had a stellar team of like top-notch artists that were absorbing the influence from anime as well as like fast-paced action. They were absorbing live action references, comedy, all these different elements, and infusing them into the show. And the other two teams that were working on the show were equally as talented. We could watch the credits to see every amazing board artist that worked on the show. It took a special group of people to be able to distill down the best elements of like your favorite anime and incorporate them into the show. Yes, it created a jaw-dropping, like loss for words after you watch an episode. Like whoa, I've never seen anything like this before. And that was kind of like the game changer to create something that was fast, entertaining, but yet also had beautiful characters that had heart and marry the storytelling that meant something.
Because if it's just fast,
right,
then it's just like a music video where it's just like something's in your face all the time. But then you don't like try to remember a music video. There's like hardly any that you can remember, or you remember bits, but you don't. There's no story,
Right. And that was the beautiful thing about like the first episode I worked on, Glitch Text. Like I was enamored with the fact that, we had amazing visuals to go with a heartfelt story. I mean, because when you strip all the visuals away, which support the story, we have a story about a young teenage girl's first day on the job, and she's got her parents' expectation that she needs to measure up to the responsibility of like taking on a job. And she has her own insecurities that she's trying to overcome as she's engaging in this first day on the job. How is she going to pull it off? And things go wrong. And they take the two main characters, Five and Miko, together they take responsibility to right the problem. They take responsibility to solve the problem. And at the end, I don't want to give it away if you haven't seen it, but it's just an episode. Each episode has the heart and the meaning woven into it. So it's not just fast visuals. It's not just like over the top, like action sequences. Because that's one of the things that I really dug into when I got onto the show was that, other action shows that I had watched, I worked on Spider-Man and other shows that I watched growing up. If the action was just there to like be like, hey, look, we got popcorn, we got like candy visuals, like, wow. But at the end of the episode that our characters are going to reset and Spider-Man's going to win. It's like, well, why did we watch all that? Like, what was the point? And
I guess that sort of feeds into your thing about the Asian cinema, because one of the things that we battle on a 24-minute show is that you get it's different on Netflix because you don't have the commercial break, but typically you would have the first act, you would introduce the story and the protagonist and what everybody's trying to do, and if they're trying to steal something or whatever. The second act, where the superhero usually is stupid, right? And then the third act, where Batman remembers, oh yeah, I have a batarang that has a bomb on it, right? And then the first time, Mr. Freeze froze my cape to the ground. The third act, when he fires and freezes my cape, I break the ice with my batarang. So working this way, where you don't have those 5-10 minute acts, does that allow you to format the storytelling differently?
The episodes were originally formatted for broadcast on Nickelodeon.
Oh, they were? Okay.
Yeah, they before they went streaming to Netflix, they were originally formatted for to to broadcast on Nickelodeon. I mean, this is pre-COVID lockdown. So we were still trying to introduce a show with an opening spike that would, a cold open that would engage the audience, because we needed to grab their attention within the first 2 minutes to entice them with the story element so that they would be hooked and then want to watch the rest of the show. And that's what a lot of shows are facing nowadays on Netflix. When you introduce a show on Netflix or other streaming platforms, like, you need to grab that viewer's attention within the first minute so that they don't click on something else, because there's there's a cornucopia of like animation content on a lot of different servers, especially on Netflix. So if you don't have enough of a story kernel and an opening, exciting visual that's going to grab the attention of the viewer in that first window, after they're gone through the opening credits, like, they're going to switch to something else. And that's what a lot of people are nervous about right now. They need to capture the attention of the audience. But I will say, like, you can capture the attention with the visuals, but then you have to hold them with a story that has heart. And the shows that have heart really capture an audience, and they capture the crew that's working on them. And that's the one big thing that I could tell you, like, from working on Glitch Decks for 2 years, everyone that was putting their effort to make that show look the way it looked really cared about the characters. They really cared about doing the same thing that what I experienced on Mulan, which is everyone was honed in through Eric and Dan's leaderships, because they were so invested in creating a content that would stand a testament to animation and the stories they were trying to tell, that we were all focused on, like, how can we make a show that's going to, withstand, and just put our best foot forward, so that, even if we only had one season, we only got one shot, we created something that people could stand back and say, wow, I'm really glad that we invested so much of our heart into.
So you have 2 seasons. Are you waiting to hear about the 3rd season, or?
I mean, if I could share a little bit of an insight, there's more in the can, basically. So we were, it's funny, like, when I was listening to Kat on your interview last week, she mentioned a production getting. It was funny because as I was listening to Kat's description of, like, a studio that announced, okay, guys, the stylist is down, get out. I was like, that sounds so familiar. Oh my gosh, I might have lived that. So, so we were in the midst of our 2nd season. We were in the middle of our 10th episode. I had a fantastic team that was working on it. I was editing with a great editor that I've worked with, Adam Rickabus, who we were cutting together the 8th episode of season 2, and the board team was thumbnailing on episode 10. And they just kind of said, you know what, we're going to put this on hold for a while, and we'll let you know. So could you please pack up all your stuff and
exit the building
at 5 o'clock. Thank you. So that was really interesting, an experience. Regardless, so there's more episodes that are boarded. They've gone through the animatic process, and they're just waiting to be put into production. And season 2, what was amazing is, like, by the midway through season 1, which is now all on Netflix, they dropped it in 2 different drops, which is they call it season 1, season 2. They did the same thing when I was on Turbo. Like, I was on Turbo, I was directing on that. Season 1 was, like, a portion of the 52. And then, like, the next portion of the 52 order dropped as season 2. And then the last portion of the 52 was dropped as season 3. And they got 3 seasons. But it was technically, like, we did 52 episodes in 1 season. So, so we have, like, some really super fun episodes that we worked on together for season 2 on Glitch Techs. And I know they would turn out as incredible as, all the episodes that are currently on Netflix for season 1 and 2. So there's still more to go. So if enough fans write in and hit up Nickelodeon on their Twitter page and be like, "Yo, we want another season of Glitch Techs," it's up to Nickelodeon and Netflix to work something out to put those into production and get the creative team back together again to make sure that happens.
So what are you working on now?
In the last, in the last year, I was working on a CG 3D. It was like 2D, 3D hybrid action show for younger audiences up to last year. Right now, I'm working on a feature film that's going to be coming out in the near future. That's it's still kind of under wraps, so it's been announced.
You don't have to drop. You don't have to drop it. Cool.
So working on that right now, and that's pretty exciting. It's got like it's an exciting property. It's got a lot. Again, the beautiful thing about it that really attracted me to it was it's a story that is it's got a lot of heart and it's got something to say. So that's something that's something I think the message they're trying to get across through the movie is something that we need. So it's going to be great.
One thing that is evergreen on Pencil to Pencil is that all of our guests have secrets. So don't feel like you have to kill an NDA, but we get it. We understand. We've all been there.
But what about comics? What about comics? Are you going to go back and do any more comics in your downtime, or do you not have any downtime?
That's really interesting. Like when I was working, as I've been working through animation, I started doing comics for Disney Adventure magazine, Disney Adventure Digest, I'm sorry, back in 2003 when that was still being published on the newsstand. And that's where I got to see some amazing art by yourself and Brett Blevins, who I was always a fan of, seeing his stuff in the, again, dating myself, back in the day when you get those big catalogs of like, comics you could order online. I think he was doing Trouble with Girls.
Yep.
That was like way back in the day. He was doing some really beautiful Pirates of the Caribbean stuff. And to see my Kim Possible comics that I was drawing for Disney Adventures published next to his stuff was just like, oh my God, like there's Brett Blevins stuff. There's Mike Manley inking over Brett Blevins.
Those were fun. Those were a lot of fun. Those comics were a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I miss that.
I do. I started off drawing Brother Bear comics, and then I moved over to Kim Possible, and then from Kim Possible to some Robin Hood stuff. And,
here, let me put those Kim Possibles on the.
Yeah. So this was pencils for a story that I wrote called Kitchen Chaos. So I wrote it and penciled it. I was talking to as I was drawing more of these comics, I'd approached Steve Belling, the editor, great guy, who I was like, hey man, like, is it possible to like write some of these things? So I started writing some of the comics and I penciled it. It's black on the screen right now. I can't see anything.
Oh, it went black? You're not seeing it?
I'm not seeing it, but if it's page one,
there you go.
Okay, there's page 5.
Yeah, I did full screen and it kind of, I guess it just blurped out. So
it got janky.
Yeah.
So this story was all about, what would happen if Kim was not capable of going on an adventure because she was down with a cold, and like if Ron had to defend the household from Monkey Fist, who found out where she lived. So again, it was just like I had never seen anything like that before done in the show, and I was a huge fan of the show and loved everything about it, and I loved drawing these characters. This was like the longest run of published comics that I had for Disney Digest was working on Kim stuff, and I just loved the character design.
How many stories did you do?
I can't remember. There was Nacho Nightmare. There was like one with, there was this one. There was one where we did like Senor shows up. I mean, love talking like that. You guys were talking with Chris Bailey about working with Ricardo Montalban.
Yeah.
Senor was a great character. So we did a story about that. There was another story with a missile meltdown, and there was another story. There was like ancient puzzle thing. There was Movie Madness, which was Ron's Adventures. There was a Brain Switch episode with Dr. Draken and Shigo. And then there was another one with pets. And I'm like,
Wow.
I'm thinking like maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 stories with like
Wow.
some other stuff in between.
Did you ink them? I don't remember. Did you ink them or?
No. Actually, I penciled them and then sent them off to be inked. And trying to remember. Yeah. So no, none of the stories actually I ink. The only stuff that I actually did ink that was published was for Hot Mexican Love Comics, which is in that batch. Wrote and penciled and inked and lettered story for that episode, that issue of Hot Mexican Love Comics from 2010, and had a chance to go down to San Diego Comic-Con and sit with Ira and Albert Caballeros, who was my supervising director at the time, behind the table with them for a little bit, which was a blast. Like I had never done that before. But working on the comic was a lot of fun because it was like from soup to nuts, like starting from the script all the way to finish and delivering it was a great experience of just sitting down and applying like everything that I had learned from my days in animation and even prior to that, working on sequential art at SVA and afterwards. So yes, I would love to get back to doing some comics. I haven't had a chance to do that late. Like I've been doing a heck of a lot of freelance over the years. So like right now I'm working on freelance for a show that's going to be on Amazon, which is kind of a fantasy show, which it's got like RPG elements in it. I don't want to say what it is, but I guess you guys can figure it out. But it's like, I would love to be able to sit down and do my own comics. And what I've been doing lately, since I'm not able to do the sequential art on the page, like I'll do little comics and post them on Instagram to get ideas down. And I think there's some elements of the animation medium that has found its way into my heart that now it's like my go-to would be like, well, how can I board this to make it into a short? Like, how can I express a story visually like a film versus the page, so that if I put it out, if I were to time out an animatic to music or something like that, that it would give people an audio-visual experience that would emotionally resonate with them.
Right.
Phil,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mike. I want to try to wrap. So Phil, there's a million questions in here, and I'm cutting it short because I'm the producer and I say we're finished. But I have one question that Oscar has been waiting really patiently since the beginning of this, and this ties back into tech because we didn't really talk about your rig or how you're doing business these days, but we talked a lot about the Cintiq. So at the beginning of your time at Disney up until now, I'm sure you've really transitioned over into digital.
Yeah.
So Oscar's question, and thanks for joining us tonight, Oscar. Oscar's question was, how was the transition from animating on paper versus digital or tradigital?
That's a good question. Great question. You know what? It's something that I had always been wanting to do. Like I had a friend of mine back in Jersey who was working in Photoshop and Illustrator when I was still working traditionally after I got out of school. And I didn't have the financial wherewithal at the time to make the transition to buy all of the Adobe programs to start learning that stuff. And it wasn't until I got into animation that I had a little bit more cash flow to invest in equipment to take the skills that I had learned traditionally and bring them over to digital. And so right now, like the studios that I've worked with, we've worked with Photoshop, to board with, Storyboard Pro to board with. One of the small projects that I worked on last year, we were using Storyboard Pro and Harmony. So I got to work with Harmony and to learn the fundamentals, which are very similar to Flash, not quite the same, but similar to that. And I would say, like, as long as you're willing to apply yourself, you can learn any tool. There's no limitations. Like, I still use pencil and paper. I'll still go back to my sketchbook and I'll sketch in it. Not as much as I used to, because I've got a lot of things going on. But as long as you're willing to apply yourself to train on either platform, it doesn't really matter. It's like, what do you bring to the table as an artist? Like,
Right.
I love the stuff that like traditional artists bring to the drawing board, as well as the digital artists. Like, there's artists that I appreciate who are working exclusively digitally, and they create some phenomenal work. And then I look at the classic artists who are still upholding the tradition of like traditional paint or traditional inks and penciling, and I look at that and I'm like, holy crap, like, it's amazing, like, just what they're doing. So it's not, I guess I never really looked at it as and it's just like, what can you do with a tool? Like, how well can you learn the tool, and what can you do with it that brings you as the artist to the fore, versus like it's not a special pen. It's who wields the pen. Like, what do they want to say with that tool? So I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling.
No, that was sexy. I like that.
Yeah. No, I think that that you also, if you're working in commercial art, that's the other thing, is you don't get to dictate how you deliver the stuff. They tell you, we want you to give it digitally, so you really have no choice but to learn how to work digitally. I mean, if you're doing it yourself, you can always say, I never want to work digitally, or I only want to use Photoshop 4 or whatever. But I mean, the students in school now have to double learn, because you got to learn the traditional, but you also have to learn the digital. So that's probably the biggest difference between, I would say, when you were in school.
He froze up.
I thought he was doing like a pregnant pause.
Yeah, exactly. So follow up on that point, Mike. What is amazing now is, like, learning the traditional skills of how to see, how to observe, how to apply your observation skills to translating what you're seeing or what you're thinking in your mind and your imagination to traditional media, whether it be oil paint, ink, pencil, whatnot. You still need to have all that foundation behind you, so that when you apply yourself to Photoshop or Storybook Pro or Harmony, like, that all still is under the hood. Like, you don't, the tool doesn't help you like become an amazing artist in that genre. Like, you still have to have all of that foundation work done, all that hard work. Like, there's no getting around it. That's the end. I guess that's the trick. It's like the Maya by itself, when we were learning it, it's not gonna make you a better animator. Like, because I remember when we were learning Maya, the animators that would go in, like, we had to use the rigs and set things up and learn the software, but they had all of the experience. We had all the experience of having learned traditional animation, and then we were just applying it through the tool to make the rig do what we needed to do. And when you see the performances that are done by 3D animators now in Disney, Pixar, and DreamWorks, and other various studios across the world, like, it's the same thing. Like, all the same principles apply, all the foundations that need to be learned and practiced over and over and over again. It's just a different way of expressing it through a different tool.
Yeah. Phil, you've been a fantastic guest. I don't know where the time is going. We
could spend another 4 hours very easily.
You know what? I mean, this is like super fun. I mean, it'd be like a super fun jam session of like just hanging out with you guys for like 4 hours talking like shop.
Yeah, like the shop talk is sorely needed, especially now that we're all kind of separated from each other.
It's become my favorite podcast. pandemic podcast.
every
Love
time
that
I say,
tagline.
every time I say that, I think Mike cringes a little bit. But like I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from people who say they kind of plan their week around our shows. So it's
That's
really
awesome.
fantastic to hear. Phil, how can people follow you on the socials? What's the best way to find you?
You can go to my Instagram page. I think it's philip.j.allora at instagram.com, something like that. I think they're at the very end of one of those PDFs, there was like a contact page that I included in there. So you can find me on Instagram.
Are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter. You know, it's really interesting. Like I post Twitter. Like Twitter's kind of like a separate feed, and then like if you want just the art, like that's mostly Instagram. So like Instagram is like for my art, and I think Twitter is kind of like my place where I just like put other stuff that I can't post on Instagram. Or not that I can't, but I just
that's your safe space.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, you know, I left my phone number in there.
I'm calling you. Where's my phone? I'm calling you right now.
For those that screen grabbed quick.
Oh, well, all right.
I included the wrong one, but
all right.
Well, we'll have to get that call block working with you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Oh, that was nice. Debbie put it up there for you. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that's my Instagram page. You can find me on Twitter. I think. I don't. Where's my? Oh, my daughter took my phone. She ran away with my phone playing games.
Well, we'll find you. Or we'll just call you and then we'll ask you.
Yeah, or you could just do a Google search for like PHIL ALLORA and just like it. There, like my website will pop up and there's a link there to take you to the Instagram page. But yeah, like you could see stuff there too. I mean, it's. I'm out there, and LinkedIn, like that's another one. But
well, thank you, man. We should really do a part 2 because I feel Mike, like we all just said, we just scratched the surface. So I know
there's a lot of questions I want to ask you guys about. Like, I want to trade notes with your experience teaching and what that's like, because there's a whole aspect of directing that it's like I wanted to get into with you guys. Because like both of you spent time in academia and, you know, working with studio assistants, and I'd love to hear more about that too. Like,
well, we do have an empty slot this Wednesday. If you
like a part 2.
That's right. Yeah, we could talk about it, but that'd be fantastic. All right, we're gonna let you go pee. Thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight, and I hope you get to enjoy the rest of your weekend with your family. Phil, Laura, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Hey, don't go. We'll close the show with you. I think you need to do Kirby hands.
Okay.
All right, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. We get to close the show with our guests. We don't do that all the time, but I think it'll be fun. So we've had a great time. If you're new to the channels, subscribe and smash that alert button on YouTube, or follow and like us on Facebook. Thank you guys so much. For our guest Phil, and for Mike and myself, this has been Pencil to Pencil. You know what to do next. Wash those curvy hands. I love it. I'll see you soon. See you on Wednesday.